This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Welcome to episode 14 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast, and today we're talking about some of the scary things that happen on our travels and how most of us seem to be able to feel the fear and travel anyway. You might remember that we've actually talked to quite a few guests already about scary things that happened on their travel back in episode 5 and again in episode 9, but it seems that everyone wants to tell me about the scary things that happened to them because although they might be a little bit frightening at the time, they do turn out to be the most memorable stories. And I think it's one of those moments when we feel quite a sense of accomplishment of getting through something on our travels that was scary. Now, I think it's important to remember that something might be frightening for us, which might not be frightening for someone else. As a very straightforward example, you will never get me to bungee jump ever because it completely terrifies me, whereas I know there's plenty of people out there who consider that something fun to do. There's no way you'll ever get me to, especially pay money to do that. Wow, scary. But in the same vein, actually, I was thinking about some of the scary experiences I had. And in particular, when I was living in Japan, I experienced my first and to date only earthquake. I was living on the 5th floor. Well, technically the 4th floor, but they don't like to use the number 4, so it was called the 5th floor. And anyway, a little bit higher than the ground. And there was, well, what turned out to be a relatively, maybe very minor earthquake one evening. I think it was 9 or 10 at night. It was dark outside in any case. And, the building started to shake and I was absolutely petrified. I grew up in a city that has never had any kind of earthquake experience. I didn't know what to do. I kind of had some vague idea of standing in the doorway, which I did. And then after the shaking stopped, I raced downstairs out into the street, expecting to find everyone out there, feeling as terrified as I was. But there was kind of nobody. And anyway, there was no more shaking and I eventually got some sort of sleep that night. And the next day when I was teaching my students, of course, I brought up the issue of the earthquake the previous evening. And I'm afraid that I think only one of them the whole day mentioned that they'd felt any shaking. And they were quite kind to me about it. They said, oh, well, you were up higher than me, so perhaps you could feel it. I didn't feel it on the ground floor where I live, or I was out at a restaurant. I didn't feel anything. So I was terrified. They didn't even notice. That's how minor it was. But it was still scary for me. And it's still a story that I remember to this day. And in fact, my first guest today had a somewhat similar experience, which is what reminded me of that earthquake, in fact. So today, for the first time, I'm going to be speaking to Annalicia Lynn, who had some really interesting experiences teaching English in Taiwan for a year. She managed to remember quite a collection of scary moments, which I could relate to quite well.
So when I was thinking about this, there was 4 things that came to mind.
Ooh, 4 scary things. Great.
Yeah. One was a few treacherous taxi rides that yes. I have no idea how we survived. Just really no idea. It just is a different traffic culture there.
Yes.
And I think taxi drivers are very confident in a way that I wasn't. I remember one time I was literally screaming, no, because this taxi was passing something. And I was like, it's okay, we're not on a time frame. But of course you can understand. So that was pretty scary. Another time, or the other things that came to mind were when we first arrived and we were at orientation, we had a major typhoon come through. Wow. And to be honest with you, that wasn't, it was maybe more eye-opening than scary, simply because we were in, at that time, like a beautiful hotel for our orientation. We were pretty lucky. So we felt very safe. But I come from the Midwest where we don't have hurricanes, which are the same thing as typhoons. And so it was very interesting to be not only in a different culture, but then in a different climate where, we have tornadoes here and we have blizzards, and I know how to deal with those. And then to have a completely different severe weather situation where I realized if this would happen again, I really have no idea what to do. That was pretty interesting. Thankfully, we didn't have any issues the rest of the year with typhoons in our area. The third was earthquakes. Mm-hmm. I had never experienced an earthquake prior to being in Taiwan. And here's the interesting thing. So my husband and I used to go to a movie about every other week. It was like our comfort. So we could
the thing like home.
Yes, exactly. We might even like order Domino's that night or something. Sometimes American people need their fast food to feel at home, apparently. But we would try to go to a movie about a couple times a month. They were American movies, of course. And we went to Avatar, and Avatar, of course, is a pretty powerful movie. There's like a lot of loud noises and things going on. And during the most intense part of the movie was when the earthquake hit, one of the earthquakes. Yeah, it was such a surreal experience. So that was the first earthquake that we experienced. And so suddenly, like, you feel this little sway, and you almost didn't know if it was the movie or because you know how you vibrate sometimes when there's loud movies.
Yeah.
But then everyone started screaming, and the funny part is we all kind of start running out and covering our head, and then it stopped. And the movie's so dang good that everyone gets back in their seats. Like, we should really all evacuate, right?
But we don't want to take the risk of missing the rest of the movie.
Exactly. And of course, there was aftershocks during it. It wasn't a huge earthquake, but it was the first noticeable one where, the building was swaying and whatnot. So that was very interesting.
Scary.
My husband experienced a really bad earthquake, or I shouldn't say really bad, because there wasn't any damage at his school, but where he was under his desk. And I was on a field trip that day in a different part of the country, so I didn't experience it, but he said that was a pretty interesting one, much bigger than the one we had at the movie theater. But then the most interesting thing, I guess, it was when about 2 weeks in, so we had not been living in Taiwan very long, I got very, very sick and had to be hospitalized.
Oh, wow.
I had a kidney infection.
Oh, no.
It was a very interesting experience. We had My Lonely Planet, and we opened it up to the back, and it said, "I'm sick, I need a hospital." So we just walked around the city showing people, pointing to those two things. Luckily, we didn't know it, but we lived like less than a mile away from the hospital. We found it. We were so blessed that, everyone spoke English.
Oh, fabulous.
I felt so incredibly grateful.
I was wondering, I was going to ask you if there was a section on kidney infection in the Lonely Planet, or how did you find out what it was?
I know, right? For the most part, the language barrier wasn't a problem. The only funny thing that happened was, it wasn't funny at the time, but the doctor was giving me an ultrasound, and she said, "Oh, yeah." She said, "Your kidney is definitely sweating." And I was like, "Oh my God, I didn't know your internal organs could sweat."
It must be.
I'm like, "But I'm sure it is. Like, I feel so awful." This, I didn't say this to her. I was saying it in my head, but I was like, I didn't know. And then she came back and she's like, "I'm sorry, it's swelling. I think I mispronounced it." I was like, okay, that makes more sense.
That does make more sense.
It was scary at first, but they were just so kind, and everyone took care of me, and they spoke my language, which was amazing, and everything turned out fine.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. So quite a lot of scary things happened to you in just a year in Taiwan.
Yes.
To be honest, it's quite a collection. But did you ever think, oh my goodness, what have we done? Or did you just, take each event as it came?
That's such a great question. I don't think we ever went that far down the rabbit hole where there was any regret, so to speak.
Right.
I think we always knew, like, this is great. This is where we need to be right now. This overall is so fun and much more. There's a lot more pros and cons, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think probably the hospital was the biggest one, just because it was so, we had just arrived, a few weeks in, and I felt so sick. I think that was when you just like really want to be home.
Yes.
And you're just kind of like, oh my gosh, is this gonna, kind of like, what have we done? But when I'm being honest, I think there was still no, it's not like we were looking up plane tickets to go home or anything once I got out of the hospital.
I can relate pretty well to quite a few of Annalicia's scary experiences there, and I particularly like her description of the treacherous taxi rides. I've had a few of those in my time too, and have also wanted to scream at the driver, "It's okay, we're not on a time frame," just like Annalicia said, but they never listen. In any case, the next guest I have today is Glenn Shiell of Snow Riders Western Australia. And he has an interesting and slightly frightening story to tell about a time when he was in China. And he was in Beijing for a few days and decided to go off and see a lesser known part of the Great Wall of China. It was about an hour and a half away from Beijing, involved a train, a bus, and a little bit of extra effort to get there so that they could find a section that was not so crowded as the main parts of the Great Wall of China.
I got onto this bus and I met two Kiwi girls, two sisters that were travelling. And that was fantastic because we decided to stay together because we were both a little bit, they were anxious and I was a little bit anxious about where I was going, and we felt as though, we could use some support, a bit of Anzac collaboration.
Perfect, yes.
Yeah, so we just by chance or by skill, I'm not sure now, but we ended up on the right bus and we were heading in the right direction out to this small little town where we've been instructed, and the directions that we've been given at the backpackers were spot on, and we're on our way out there. And so finally we arrived at this, after some twists and turns, we arrived at this, it was like a little, I don't know if you'd even call it a hamlet, but there were just a few little houses. There was a little stall on the side of the road that was selling dry goods, tin cans and that sort of thing. And then just down the road from the little stall, there was a path that led from the road where the bus stopped across a little stream, and then it led you to a little windy path that went around. And when we stood at the bottom of this path, we looked up and we could see the Great Wall of China. So sure enough, and it was a really hilly, mountainous area as well. So you can see the wall literally just snaking up these hills.
It sounds beautiful.
Yeah, it was really picturesque, really, bright green and quite big mountains as well, and freezing cold. I felt like it was going to snow at any minute. It was in October. So we could see our objective, but we had to trek to get to it along this little path. So the other thing to note here is that when we arrived and in amongst all this stuff, but sort of down the hill a little bit, were these men that were, we can't tell whether they were in the army or whether they were, I don't know, whether they were reservists or what, but they were wearing part camouflage gear and part civilian gear, but they had some pretty serious machine guns with them. We don't know why or what they were doing, but they had machine guns. So they were like AK-47s or something. So we decided that, we're not going anywhere near those guys. And the other thing about these guys is that they were drinking, and they were clearly drunk. So that was, it was bad enough that they had machine guns, but the fact that they were
drunk with machine guns, that doesn't sound good.
Terrifying. So anyway, so they were far enough away that, I don't even think they noticed us. So we sort of got onto this path and sort of out of sight of them. And anyway, so, after about an hour of climbing up this wall and really enjoying ourselves, we turned around and we had a really amazing view back over the village. We could see everything, the hut and everything, and then we could also see these army guys that were specs down in the distance. So as we decided that it was time to descend down the wall, and as we were walking down sort of single file, I was in front, I suddenly heard this ear-splitting crack go off above our heads. It was really loud. It was like a firecracker had gone off just, inches from the tops of my head. And I turned around, it's quite surprising. I was like, where the hell did it come from? Because there was nothing out here, right? Just hills and the wall. And those guys were a good several hundred, 300 metres down the hill, so just specks. And the girl behind me, the Kiwi girl, I can't remember their names now, but she had just gone as white as a sheet.
Oh, no, I bet.
She said that her ear was just ringing. And I don't know why I knew this, but I was kind of into military history and sort of studied, rifles and that sort of thing. And I knew that the only thing that could have made that sound going over our heads was a round from an assault rifle that was breaking the sound barrier as it passed over.
Oh, gosh. Ah.
Yeah, these rounds travel at, they're supersonic rounds.
Right. Oh.
And, so that was the worst realisation that, clearly somebody, probably one of these paramilitary guys, had just taken a shot, probably thinking just to scare us, but it had actually gone really, really close to us.
Yeah.
So, so we turned around and I said, look, girls, just run up to the nearest turret where we could, seek some shelter and, just waiting for the next round to go off over our heads. But it didn't, luckily, and we got to the turret. And I explained to the girls what I thought it was, which, just added to the panic.
I bet it did, yes.
Yeah. But luckily, because the wall was sort of falling down a little bit, there were the equivalent of like rocky steps going down one side. It was actually just rubble, but we could actually climb down the opposite side of the wall to where these men were with the guns, which took us out. We got out down past the wall and we went out through a riverbed back around the other side, and we ended up getting back to the, after some time walking and still being quite worried that perhaps these guys might be coming up the wall or, might try and do something further.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we got back to the village. And then,
phew. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, so, and we couldn't see the men anymore. They were out of sight. So a bus came fairly quickly, another minibus, and I remember as we were getting onto the bus, we were at that little hut, and some time had passed and we felt a little bit more comfortable. So we all bought these Chinese beers, these little cans, which we thought we'd drink on the bus. And so we did. So in celebration, we opened these cans of beer, and then I proceeded to drop mine as the bus was going around the corner, and it sprayed all over the back of the bus, and I felt terrible as this, Australian tourist that just made a mess in this poor man's bus. But at the same time, we were kind of euphoric that we'd survived this whole ordeal, somebody shooting a rifle at us.
I have to say I'm envious that Glenn has made it to the Great Wall of China, but I'm not envious that he can add getting shot at to his list of travel experiences. That's not something I really want to have happen to me ever. Thank you very much. My final guest today is Diane Bortoletto of Traveletto. So this is my lovely friend Di, who you may remember from episode 11 when we shared the story of losing each other on the train in Bangkok. Today, Di's going to tell us a story about a trip she made just a few years ago to Brazil with a girlfriend of hers, and she had some trouble with a hotel booking.
When I was there in 2010, travelling with a girlfriend of mine, but at that point, because South America was fairly cheap, we had decided to get our own hotel rooms. So moving on to our next destination, we'd both been online, a few days before and booked. She booked a hotel. I went to book a room at the same hotel when she finished on the internet, but had sold out. So I booked a room at another hotel in the same town, a little beachside town on the coast of Brazil, thinking that they wouldn't be too far apart from each other. Anyway, so we travel for about 9 hours on a bus, end up in Itakari in Brazil, small coastal surf village, if you like. The bus station's nothing but a tin sort of shed and had some dodgy taxis out the front. And it's dark. It's about 8:30 at night. And we went to a taxi driver and we both showed him our printed off confirmations of the hotel bookings that we had, and he shakes his head and he says in Portuguese, all I understood was 35 kilometres, pointing different directions. So our hotels weren't exactly, it's night, and it's like, and so my girlfriend says to me, all right, I'll meet you back at this bus station at 6 a.m. in 2 days' time. The plan was to catch a bus to our next destination. It's like, yeah, cool. All right, see you then. So she gets in one taxi, I get in the other. And off we go. And so the taxi driver knows where he's taking me. We're driving along. It's pitch black. Like there's no street lights, nothing. We're on the fringes of the Amazon jungle as well. So pitch black. And I'm staying in a place called Jungle Lodge. It looks beautiful on the internet.
Yes, anyway, it sounds lovely.
Yeah. So we're driving along. All of a sudden he turns off the main road into a dirt road.
Uh-oh.
And we're driving, and I'm sitting in the back, and I'm, the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up, and I'm thinking, oh my God. Then there's another car that's tailgating him that just comes out of nowhere, and he's tailgating the taxi, and I'm thinking, they're his friends in the back. They're going to chop me up into little pieces after they've done God knows what to me and just dump me out here in the middle of the jungle, and no one knows where I am. And oh my God. And I was thinking, I can't even get my Swiss Army knife because it's in the boot in my backpack of the taxi. And I thought, oh, what do I do? And I actually had thoughts of opening the car door and rolling out and just leaving all my luggage there.
Wow.
Yeah, because I was freaking out. Yeah, I was. And he must have sensed my fear and said in Portuguese, which I can't understand, but I can speak a little bit of Italian and Spanish. So in Portuguese, my understanding was the road's broken, which is why we have to go this way.
Oh, okay.
And I thought,
feasible, but
I know. So I'm going, and I'm still freaking out in the back seat. Anyway, the car behind us disappears. The headlights are gone, and I don't know what's happened to him. And about 10 minutes later, I see a sign for Jungle Lodge, and I have never in my life been so happy to see a sign ever. And he takes me up, drives through the gates, takes me to the front of the accommodation, and I'm greeted by the warm hosts who manage the place, and everything was fine. I know, phew. So anyway, I arranged for that taxi driver to pick me up at 5:30 in the morning in 2 days' time to take me back to the bus station to meet my girlfriend. But that taxi journey was... Yeah, when I told my mum and dad that story, they had a meltdown. They're like, this is why we stress about you going overseas to all these places. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm here. And it was fine. And it was just, exactly. But I know.
Possibly the only mistake was telling your parents about it.
Possibly. But at that time, yeah. I mean, just to have those sort of thoughts of, how can I defend myself? I can't. Oh, well, I don't have any weapons, so to speak. No, the Swiss Army knife. Not that was going to do anything. I'd have to stab somebody like 967 times to get a. Do you know what I mean? It's not going to.
Still, it would just would have made you feel better if it was in your pocket or something.
Oh, but to see it, even have those thoughts running through your head is
terrifying, isn't it?
No, I was on the edge. Yeah.
We do have all kinds of crazy thoughts going through our heads when we get into those situations that seem frightening, like Di's situation there in the Brazilian jungle. I think some of it comes from watching too many scary movies and reading too many books, but, occasionally these terrible things happen, but not often enough to stop us from travelling, and I certainly know that Di has definitely not stopped travelling after her experience there in Brazil. So that's it for episode 14 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Thank you very much for listening. And as always, a really big thanks to my really lovely guests. First up, we had Annalicia Lynn of Yoga and Pilates Online. So you can actually find her at yogaandpilatesonline.com. And secondly, we spoke with Glenn Shiell of Snow Riders Western Australia. You can find that site at snowriderswa.com. And he also has a really lovely Facebook community. If you just look up Snow Riders Western Australia on Facebook, or they're at facebook.com/snowriderswa. And last but so definitely not least, the lovely Di of Traveletto, and you can find her at traveletto.com, and that's with 2 L's and 2 T's. All of these details and more will be in the show notes, and for this episode, those show notes will be found at notaballerina.com/14. That's the number 14. If you have been enjoying the Thoughtful Travel podcast, I would be eternally grateful if you could hop onto iTunes and leave a rating or a review. That really helps other people to find the Thoughtful Travel podcast as well. You can also tweet me at Amanda Kendall and use the hashtag ThoughtfulTravelPod, or leave me some feedback on Facebook by searching for Not a Ballerina. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.
Jackrabbit FM. For your ears.
Who is that? Hi, Puck Pass.